All right. Recording is in progress. That means we're ready to roll. And we are excited about today's Tanya class. Let me just get this on the right thing. Okay. Today's class is about a very important topic, and that is the topic of humility. So, there's an old Jewish joke, and it goes like this. There was a synagogue in which in which it was the night of Yom Kippur, and everybody was just feeling the aura, feeling the feelings of Yom Kippur. And suddenly, before the service starts, the rabbi is so overcome with emotion, and he runs over in front of the ark, and he fully prostrates himself, and he says, "God, in front of you, I am literally nothing." And when he's done, the cantor gets up and runs straight over there, prostrates himself in front of the ark, and says, "God, before you everything is naught, and I am like dust." And then finally, the Gabbai is so inspired, he runs up and he bows before the ark and he prostrates himself and he says, "God, in front of you, I'm a nobody." So the rabbi looks at the chazan, at the cantor, and he says, "Look who thinks he's a nobody." What's the joke? The joke is that sometimes people think that if you're humble, then you're special, right? In other words, being humble means that I am somebody special. So I think that we all would like to think of ourselves as being humble, but like most areas of life, as we delve deeper into our psyche, we will realize that we have much to improve in our humility. The more that we think about it, and the more we realize our thought process, we realize that we have much to improve in our humility. So I'll start off with this little exercise. Good to see you, B'chonya. I'll start off with this little exercise. You can feel free to post, but on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the most humble and 10 being not humble at all, let's say 10 is arrogant, how humble do you think you are? Okay, you don't have to post it, but just think to yourself how humble you think you are, and how much humility do you have, and then the next thing I want you to think about before we begin this class is um, how does your humility express itself in your interactions with people that you deem less than yourself? So again, how does your humility express itself um, with people that you deem to be less than you? Now, if you don't deem anybody less than you, I'd be very shocked. But it's possible. It's possible that you're there. But I think most of us have people that we judge to be less than us for whatever reason. And so, how would your humility express itself in the way you interact with people that you deem to be less than you? Now, by the way the class is going to go really is going to point out that who says there really is anybody less than you. But be that as it may, the reason I'm saying this is because I think personally, even for me, that's a very high level to reach. Um, I think we'll always hold conflicting thoughts, meaning I believe that I'm better than someone else, and then I have to tell myself that I'm not. It's just my personal belief for my level where I'm at. You may be better than that. That's fine with me. I'm just telling you that that the class is going to give perspective into why I'm not better than someone else. And so even though I may have in my mind that I am better than them, I will always remind myself why I am not better than them and therefore treat them with the respect that they deserve. The final question I want you to ask yourself before we start the class of humility is think of someone that you deem to be a very humble person. Okay? Think of someone that you think is humble, how they express, how they act, and and how you would want to emulate them. And what this class is going to do for us in humility is similar to many other areas of what the Tanya has done. And that is that it says, if you want to reach a certain feeling, which humility is kind of a feeling which then expresses itself in action. That's really what it is. We don't think of it, but humility It's not just how we act, it's a feeling. You actually have to feel humble. The feeling of humility can be elicited like other feelings through our thought process. And so we will need to change some of our thought processes in order to gain more humility in our life. Now, the points of this chapter are very, I want to say almost simple. It is unique. The Tanya's perspective is unique, but it is simple. And it's also powerful. But because it's so simple, we can also easily overlook it. In other words, concepts that are so simple, they seem so obvious that then you don't think about it. And so that's why I'm cautioning in the beginning that in order for something to affect how you feel, you need to contemplate about it. And that's why I said in my text before this class, we're going to try and discuss and have real life examples of how we can think differently. Um, and that is going to be today's class in a nutshell. It's going to be about humility. There's really two layers to the humility. One layer of the humility is why the other person is not so terrible. That's layer one. And layer two is why you are probably worse than them. So again, number one is why that person is not so bad, and number two is why you may be worse than them. In other words, let me back up. How do we judge who is better than another? We generally judge by what we see. We judge by we're judging the other person by their actions. You have somebody who's just not a nice person. You have someone who's or maybe if you're religious, not a religious person. You have someone who's not kind. You have someone who's there's all different ways that we judge people based on we see their actions. And today it's going to give us it's going to say hold off on judging other people. Let's think twice about this. And second of all, it's going to put a magnifying glass to how we judge ourselves. Why we judge ourselves so great and how we may be totally off. Or not totally off, but off enough that we don't realize it. Okay. So with that perspective in mind, we are ready to get started here with the topic of humility. The actual text itself is actually straightforward. And I want to back up. Remember, the Tanya has lessons it's part of a general theme of the Tanya, and then there's each chapter is a standalone lesson. This chapter actually is very standalone because actually it was not included in the original Tanya. This concept of this chapter was not included in the original Tanya, it was added afterwards. It is slightly connected to the previous chapter where we said in order to be spiritual, you need to not have such a big ego. And so we had a whole chapter last week. And so this week is connected with that. In other words, humility automatically means you have less ego. But at the same time, it really is a standalone lesson. And that's why it kind of wasn't in the Tanya. It's just an important, powerful idea in humility. But then again, remember, it helps us in our general spiritual journey, which is the purpose of the Tanya. And that is, if we want to be more spiritual, we need to have less ego. And in order to have less ego, you need to have more humility in your life. So I think that is a good enough preface, and I think with that we are ready to roll. So let us I'll just end up with one more thing. So how do we generally judge ourselves? How do we generally judge other people? Why do we think we're better than them? It might be spiritually we feel ourselves better than them. It might be we feel smarter than them. It might be that our job is better than them. It might be that we have more money than them. They're all different areas of life, right? So it could be someone might have more money than you, but they just got lucky, right? So you judge them to be less than you, right? Or it might be someone is more spiritual than you, but you see that they're right officially. In other words, they keep more Torah and mitzvot, but you see their character traits are very coarse, right? So they're not very kind, and so automatically you judge them to be less than you. It's human nature to judge others around us to be less than us. Human nature, I say. You can train yourselves differently. Why? Because we want to feel good about ourselves. And there's a story actually of the fifth Chabad Rebbe and his brother that one time they were playing and one brother pushed the other down, and their father, who was the Rebbe, then told him, if you want to raise yourself up against someone else, you don't push them down, you raise yourself up. You have to raise yourself up, and that's really the whole point of this chapter. Is we're never pushing anybody else down. We always have to aspire to do better ourselves. All right, with that, let us take a look at this chapter. You know what? I really should end up with one final thing, and the final thing is humility. I want to hear from you. How would you define humility? How can someone be humble? Let's say, okay, what how do you how are you humble? How are you humble? There are people around you. How do you humble yourself? Any thoughts?
Usually you talk less and listen more
Uh,
because when you start talking, things can come out of you that you probably will regret later.
Good, good. But that is an action. The action is born out of humility. That you before the reason you're not talking is because you feel humble. Right? So let's say, all right, it's easy to not talk in front of someone who knows a lot more than you. Let's say someone that you think is not as wise as you. Why would you choose to listen and not talk?
Because there's no point if you, and sometimes you can, honestly, you can tell when a person is just talking nonsense. What are you gonna do? You're gonna keep going with a conversation that is going to lead you nowhere, or you're just going to just smile and change the subject. Like that happens a lot to people that you start talking about a certain topic, let's say Israel, whatever, and that person doesn't know anything about the situation. They just read their news on Facebook or whatever the case is. Uh, you're just literally wasting your time trying to convince someone otherwise, and you have to know exactly what type of person you're dealing with, because there are some people that you can have a conversation that is not a person that is just immediately thinking, oh no, I'm going to contradict whatever this person says. Oh, and then it's going to
So
another
if
thing.
I hear what you're saying is very good. If I were to just summarize, the humility there is in two things. Number one, you recognize your limitation and being able to change everybody's mind just by your sheer brilliance, right? That would be one level of humility. And number two is recognizing that some people have been listening to stuff for a long time and wherever they get their information, and you have the humility to accept that you cannot change everything. I don't know if that's correct, but that's my take on what you said. The humility
Yeah,
behind the action. The action is correct.
that's going in the right direction. Yes, that is.
Okay, good, good. All right, I like it. Rick, you unmuted? You wanted to say something?
no, I,
Okay,
I she hit all my points.
okay, okay.
I am humbled.
You are humbled.
I am humbled.
Okay, good, good. All right, someone here wrote to be gracious. So let me ask another deeper question. Let's say, how can we be humble when we know we're really good at something? Now, we're not talking about convincing. So I know I'm really good at something. How can I be humble? Yes, Rick.
If you're going to start comparing yourself, there's somebody better at it than you are.
Okay. All right, but what if you're Moses? Okay, no, I'm not gonna go
Oh,
hypotheticals here.
well, if
If
you're
you're
Moses,
Moses,
you go about your business and you do what you're supposed to do, and you just do what you're supposed to do. You don't deviate from that. You don't show people how great you are. You just do your thing.
I think also when you restrain yourself from embarrassing that person, like in public, like more that if you are in public, you're not going to be like, uh, embarrassing that person. Maybe you can have that conversation in private, but that is also part of being humble. Know that just because the other person doesn't have the knowledge on that topic doesn't mean that person is entirely an idiot. Could be that they just don't know about that particular subject.
Good, good. Nicole, you wanted to say something?
I think I don't know if this is what you're looking for, but like when I'm good
I'm
at
looking for everything. I'm
okay,
I'm exploring
when
here.
when I'm good at something,
Yeah.
it means I've spent a lot of time in it, and usually it means there's always something more to learn. And no matter who it is, I tend to find myself listening in those circumstances because it could have evolved or changed, or I don't know. It's interesting. Like, I think I find myself more humble in things that I'm better at, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it goes with the line. The more you learn, the more you know, the more you know,
The more you realize you don't know.
you realize you don't know. Yeah. 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 Very good. Okay. So we got a lot of great ideas. Appreciate it all. The reason I'm bringing it out is I want to know how we think currently, and then see what the Tanya is going to add into our humility. So again, the Tanya is actually not going to focus. A lot of people focused on the action, which I tried to pull it back. What's the feeling behind that action? The Tanya is going to focus on our thought process, and then of course, God willing, the action flows. But that is again generally the Tanya's outlook is we need to start with the I'm doing this wrong. We need to start with the thought process, and that changes the action. And I also want to put the Tanya into historical perspective, though of course it applies to all of us. The Tanya's historical perspective was most likely talking, or generally talking, to a religious Jew who felt better than maybe not someone who's not religious, but a less learned or possibly also less religious Jew. But the principles and the concepts apply at all different levels. Like I said earlier, you could look at a religious Jew, but see how they act, and once again say they're less than you because their actions, their midot, their character traits are clearly far inferior to how you act. And so it's easy enough to look down at them also. It's not just about that. Yes, humility will also express itself in admitting when you're wrong. Okay, so let's take a look at the actual chapter. So also take the following to heart. Try to fill the teaching of our sages of blessed memory. Be humble in spirit before everyone, which implies you shouldn't just act humbly, but you should literally and genuinely feel humble before everyone, even the most religiously irreverent person, Jew or non-Jew. Okay? So the Tanya here is telling us that when the sages say you should be humbled before everyone, it means not humble in action. It means humble in spirit. Humble how you feel. So again, it's much easier to act humble than it is to actually feel humble. And of course, this goes with the general Tanya's feeling. If you feel humble, you'll act humble. And the Tanya is saying that this has to be real. And so the Tanya is going to answer the question to a religious Jew: how can I truly feel humble in front of someone who clearly looks inferior to me? So he continues. And I'm just going to mute everybody. And again, you can unmute at any time in the class. Okay, so he continues. And the key to doing this is by following another teaching of our sages of blessed memory. And this is going to be step one. Do not judge another person until you have been in his circumstances. So everybody knows, don't judge them. I'm in their circumstances. The simple meaning is like, am I, facing their difficulty, right? So it's easy to judge, let's say, the prime minister of Israel. Why is he making good deals or bad deals or whatever you want to call it? But obviously we understand he's under enormous pressure that we're not under. So can I truly judge him? And so the Tanya is going to take this concept and stretch it to apply really to all cases. That not only is circumstance applied to their literal circumstance, like the prime minister is being pressured from so many countries, but it also applies to your inner circumstances. Okay, how were you brought up? What type of Yetzer Hara evil inclination do you have? So let's continue. Because it's his circumstances that caused him to sin. For example, it could be that his work requires him to be around the marketplace all day, exposed to its negative influences and temptations, and at any moment when he is not doing business, he inevitably becomes one of those who sits at the street corners, surrounded by gossip, and as the eyes see every form of temptation, and when the eyes see, their heart craves, and the passion of his impulse to evil are ignited like an oven blazed by a baker, as written in Hosea, it blazes like a flaming fire, etc. Right? So, simply put, if you're a religious Jew who studies Torah all day in the study hall, you can easily look down at the irreverent Jew. But you know what? That irreverent Jew is not sitting in the study hall all day. He's sitting in the marketplace and all the influences of the world. And can you blame him when something happens wrong? And as he continues, this is quite different from the person who spends little time around the marketplace. Most of the day he's sitting at home. And it's different from a person who is around the marketplace all day, but and this is the but, this is an important line, as can be seen. Well, sorry, wait, I must have skipped. But, or is this the wrong page? 342. As can be seen, is not so easily aroused by, As can be seen, is not so easily aroused by his nature to seek pleasure, since the impulse to evil is not the same in all people. Some people have a particularly strong impulse to evil, while others do not, as explained elsewhere. So he's saying here a very simple point. He's saying, not only can I not judge someone because their actual physical circumstances may be different than mine, there's also an inner layer that I don't see. That is their evil inclination. How can I judge anybody? I literally have no idea what their desire to do evil is. I made this point actually in Shul this week. You know, we could look at the Tanakh, at the books of the prophets, and we look at these Jews serving idols, and we're like, how do they do this? How do they serve idols? I mean, they saw God, they had prophets, they had a temple. How is it possible that they would bow down to idols? Idols are so stupid, right? Who wants to serve an idol? But there's two things we're missing. Number one is the societal pressure that they had to serve idols. Everybody did it. It was the end thing, no matter how dumb it is. Okay, people today do super dumb things, right? People today do super dumb things because everybody else is doing it. Number two, they had a powerful evil inclination to serve idols. Our sages in the Talmud tell us that at some point they removed that inclination from us. That's why we don't see Jews serving idols too much anymore. They removed most of that inclination. Till then, it says it was a very powerful desire that was inside of every person. Okay? So we can look at the books of the prophets and judge them. We're totally off. We need to apply their desires to our desires. Whatever was going, we have desires as well that we're failing at that they didn't fail at. Okay, they failed at idolatry, but that's because A, it was the end thing, and B, that was their evil inclination. We have to look at what we're failing at. I'm failing at areas where A, it's the end thing, and B, it's where the evil inclination is at. Okay, so I have no right to judge anybody else because even if I'm privy to their external situation, I'm definitely not privy to their internal situation. Now, the Tanya is going to put a side point here that nobody should make a mistake. Nobody should think that you have an excuse to make wrong choices. Okay, so now we're turning to somebody who actually is in a bad situation and has a strong evil inclination. We have to know there's no excuses because we can always overcome. If we're put in a situation, God gives us the ability to overcome. So let's just read this section here. It's kind of a side point, but it's an important point as well. The Tanya is quick to clarify that this argument of judging people favorably due to their circumstances does not excuse sinful behavior. It just helps you understand it and soften your judgment of it. Now, in truth, even a person who's very easily aroused to seek pleasure and his work does require him to sit at street corners all day, exposed to all sorts of temptation and negative influences, has no justification for his sins, and the moment he sins, he is classified as a complete evil person, since there's no trepidation of God before his eyes. While some situations may be more challenging than others, ultimately, we all have free choice over our actions and should never excuse our own sins. For he should have restrained himself and taken control of his heart's pleasures, seeking urges, due to trepidation of God, who watches over all his actions, as has been explained above, and since inherently and naturally in every person, the brain rules over the heart. So here he's pointing out very importantly, if God puts you in a situation, of course, you need to know that you can overcome. You can overcome, and this brings to mind a story of there was one time one of the kids, one of the Rebbes, asked his father, "Why do we have two eyes?" He said, "To look at others with the right eye, and to look at yourself with the left eye." Meaning, the right eye is love, and the left eye is more critical. Now, obviously, I know there's a discussion today about being embracing and loving yourself and caring for yourself. The basic point is what this Tanya here is saying is that though I can easily give other people a pass, I do have to understand for myself that there are really no excuses. There are reasons, and God understands, and God knows me, and God gave me the situation. But at the same time, I always have to know that I do have that ability to overcome. And that is what the Tanya is cautioning here. All right. The next section of the Tanya is, again, there's two parts. Part number one was to say, how can you judge the other person? Do you know how hard it is for them? You don't know. You really don't know how hard it is for them. They might be facing something so difficult that you wouldn't have any idea. The next section of Tanya is, I think, the even more powerful part. Okay, the first part, I think anybody could really come to the conclusion. Maybe we don't always think about it, but anybody could come to the conclusion that definitely in the external circumstances, somebody else's circumstance is much different than mine. Now getting into the Yetzer Hara, that comes into our belief that someone else's evil inclination is worse than mine. But now we get into the second section. This is the more difficult part because it's more personal, and that is looking at ourselves. Now we have to look critically at ourselves and judge ourselves accordingly, meaning not only can I not judge someone else because who knows what they're going through, the Tanya is now going to make the argument that in the areas of life that you're going through, you're a bigger failure than that person. So again, not only does that person have a difficult time, in your life struggles, you are a bigger failure than that person. You see, we tend to judge by results. This world is a results-driven place. Okay, and we have to. It's a results-driven place, and how else are you going to judge things? They say there's no trophies for effort, but recently in schools and other places they give trophies for effort, and there's a lot of discussion about it, and some people don't like it. The Tanya here is actually going to say to a very large extent, there are trophies for effort. In other words, it's very possible that the much more successful person is extending much less effort than the non-successful person. Now, in the world of economics, nobody really cares. But in the world of serving God, effort is what matters. Remember, we've been talking the entire Tanya. It's about serving God. And so it's possible that the person that does less than you, whatever they do takes more effort, and they are expending more effort in their service of God than you are, because there are areas that you serve God where you could do a lot more, and you are not because you're not willing to put in the extra effort. So this requires us taking a hard look at ourselves and to tell ourselves, who am I to judge the other person? It's so easy, but the truth is that I am barely putting in effort. Let me give a simple example. The Tanya is going to really get into examples, but let me give a simple example. Let's say charity, okay? I give 10% of my earnings to charity, okay? That is the Jewish law. I know many Jews who do not give 10% to charity, and it could be very easy for me to say, look, I'm a poor person. I'm giving 10%. And why can't this guy give 10%? But it very well could be that the effort that I have to extend in giving 10% is not that hard. Okay, I grew up religious. For me to give the 10% is not a big struggle. No, very honestly, like I believe in it. I grew up with it. It's the thing. Like I know I have to do it. It's an obligation. I do it. But it's possible that I struggle in other areas of charity. Maybe giving a little more than 10%. Maybe giving to people who I feel are less deserving. It could just be not just how much I give, but it's the way I give. It could be my compassion in helping people. There are other areas within charity that I could be doing better, but I am not expending effort. And so it could be that the other person who's only giving 5% to charity, not 10%, so they're not following the technical law, is expending much more effort in serving God by giving at the very least that 5% than I am in giving my 10%, and I'm not willing to put in the extra effort to do the next step that I can in giving charity. So so this all this brings out is it's really impossible to judge anybody else, because if we take a hard look at ourselves, it's not about what I'm actually doing. It could be in the areas that I do, I could be doing more, and it's not just quantity. It's a lot of times it's quality. A lot of times it's quality. So let's say I'm somebody that studies all day, but let's say during my studies I'm much more distracted than someone else. So it's easy to judge someone else who doesn't study, but maybe I'm not expending the effort in my studies. Okay, I could be studying Torah much deeper than I really am. So all of this is to say that not only can I not judge the other person because I don't know their circumstances, but if I take a hard look at my circumstances, I could clearly see that I myself am not doing a great job in expending the effort. And when it comes to serving God, effort plays a large role. Effort plays a large role when it comes to serve God. Okay. Are people with me? Something that looked like somebody might be frozen. Just want to make sure you're here. You're here?
Here.
Okay, good. All right. All right, so let us read inside. So he says like this. Now, to beat the impulse, he's going to talk about effort. All right, now to beat the impulse to evil, which blazes like a flaming fire, through trepidation of God, really is an enormous and difficult struggle. It is like a real test of faith. So we're saying now, going back to this irreverent Jew who sits in the marketplace all day, though he can overcome, for him to overcome would be very difficult. Okay? The real question is, how much is a person actively engaged in a struggle? External levels of observance tell us little or nothing about what is going on inside another person. And this, Tanya just gives us insight in how to be humble spirit before everyone. Since you don't know a person's struggle, what you do know for sure is that you could be struggling more, meaning you could put in more effort in your service of God. So this guy that you see in the marketplace that struggles and fails, he might actually also be winning some of his struggles that take enormous effort, but you wouldn't notice because you just see his failures. Okay. But I can tell you that person, although you see his failures, do you know how many times he also overcomes? He or she overcomes. And what about you? Are you expending the effort that that person does in the areas where they excel, in the areas where they overcome? Are you putting in that same amount of effort? So let us continue. Therefore, every person must take into account his current standing and level in worship of God to weigh and evaluate for himself if he is really worshiping God at the same level as those faced with enormous struggles and tests mentioned above, people who are exposed to unimaginable temptations. This is both in positive areas of do good, such as struggling to worship through devotional prayer, pouring out your soul before God, literally with all your energy. As the Sifri teaches on the verse, you shall love God with all your soul until the last drop of life is wrung out of you. So here he's giving an example. One area where you can excel, let's say you're praying. Are you praying with devotion? Are you praying, pouring out your soul? Are you praying with all the feelings? So sure, the other person prays once a day. The other person only says Modani. And you pray every day, 3 times a day. But what's the quality of your prayer? Okay, so though you may do more quantity, but the quantity for you is not a struggle. You grew up praying 3 times a day. Or maybe you didn't grow up praying 3 times, but now it's not a struggle anymore. Remember, we spoke about in a previous chapter, I think it was chapter 14 or 15, I don't remember, 13, 14, 15. It was about 14, I think it was. It was about someone who does everything right, but is called not serving God because they don't struggle. Everything comes natural to them. That's the question. Are you struggling? Are you pouring out? So in this case, when it comes to prayer, well, what's the quality of your prayer? Are you struggling in prayer? Are you struggling to overcome? Are you trying to gather yourself to pour out your soul to connect to God? Again, it's in quantity, in quality, the effort that that person puts in their prayer, which is not often, is much more than the effort I put in my prayer, even though I spend much more time on my prayers. Then he continues, as well as fighting vigorously against your body and its animal soul, which dampen your devotion, to crush and grind their opposition to dust, every day as a preparation before the morning and evening prayers, the afternoon service, which comes in the middle of the day, does not afford much time for preparation. Meaning, you could spend time what he's talking about here is getting yourself in the right frame of mind. Okay, in the afternoon prayers, there's no time, but in the morning, we're supposed to get ourselves in the right frame of mind before we pray. Okay, when I first wake up, do I look at my phone, check my emails, check my messages, and then I start to pray? Now I'm thinking about all my business. I should expend more effort in getting myself in the right frame of mind. Then he continues, and in addition to this preparation before prayer, also during prayer, you ought to exert yourself, toiling with your body to silence its urges, and toiling with your soul to become excited about spiritual things, as will be explained later at length. Prayer is a very, very involved moment. Prayer is a time when we're supposed to spend exerting ourselves to be more spiritual beings. I always say that prayer is a time really not just talking to God, but talking to ourselves. Prayer is a time to during the day we're busy, we're working. Prayer is a time to think about how we can be more spiritual, more connected, more godly, and not give in to our urges more. So again, prayer is a very could be a extremely strenuous activity. You don't think about it because we get up and we say the words, but that's just saying the words. If we truly get involved in our prayer, it's a strenuous activity. They tell the story of the great Hasidim. When they would pray, they would sweat profusely because they were working on themselves, as the Tanya talks about in chapter 42, how prayer is something we can work on ourselves. So let me pause here for a moment. Let's talk about something practical in your lives. He's giving spiritual, but let's take these principles and let's talk about somebody that you may know that is just annoying. Someone that you know is just, you just can't handle them. They just don't think normally. They talk too much. They say silly things. They act funny. And so you would take the principles of this Tanya and you would say, listen, I act normal, not because I'm better than them. Maybe I had a better upbringing. Maybe my nature is different. There's no reason that I should view myself better. Now, obviously, I can't let myself get dragged by these types of people, but I need to treat them with respect and dignity in ways that I can, because I understand that though I am quote unquote more normal, that doesn't make me better. That's the thing. It's the same thing. So more religious doesn't make you better either, right? Or less religious doesn't make you better, right? I gave the other example earlier, right? So let's say this is an example. Let's say again, everybody here is somewhat traditional, right? And you see someone that's religious but has very bad character traits, and it's so easy to judge them. You say, "Look, I'm not even religious, and I'm much better than them." The Tanya would say, "Hold off a second. Who are you to judge them? How can you judge?" He's religious because he doesn't struggle in the areas of putting on tefillin and prayer, whatever it is, but he struggles in these character traits. He was born with very bad character traits. His parents abused him. Whatever happened, he had bad schooling. He was bullied in school. Just because he's religious, why does that prevent him from struggling in areas of human character traits? Um, it's something I tell people all the time. When Hasidic Jews do wrong things, I say people are people. He's another human being. Just because he's religious, that doesn't mean he's not struggling in another area of his life. And why should I judge him and say, well, look at how religious he is and look what he did? It's sad, but I don't necessarily think that I'm better than that person. I don't struggle in the areas that he or she struggled in, but in areas that I struggled in, maybe I failed. Yes, Nicole.
You're saying that, you may not be more godly if you're religious, but you're more godly if you're up for the struggle to be more connected to God.
The point of this chapter is we all, God gives each and every one of us a different set, a totally different life. Our actual circumstances, what we're born into. Okay, I was born into a religious family. Many were not. Then there's the schooling you go. So there's external circumstances. Okay, nature inertia. Let's call it nature inertia. We all are born with different circumstances, and based on that, God expects of us different things to some extent, and also the amount of effort required for each and every single one of us to move up in our journey is different, and it might be at a different pace. So I think I confused everybody. Let me make it simple.
And I'm looking at the words effort and struggle. So, and I think you're
Yeah.
saying
Let me make it simple again. So basically, God does look at our effort and struggle. When we go to heaven, right? When we pass away, we say, "Blessed is the true judge." That means God actually judges not just by what we ultimately do; He judges by the effort that it took for us to do it. Yes, that's why we call God the true judge. A court of law cannot judge by effort. It's silly. It's impossible. Human beings cannot see that. We cannot know that. It's not possible. God tells the courts, you have to judge by what you see. But God himself does judge by the effort that is needed and required. Yes. So the answer is God judges by the effort. And therefore, this is not, by the way, a reason to say that I'm not so bad. It's a reason to say that who am I to say I'm better than other people? That other person who I deem, for whatever reason, I have many reasons I could deem them being less than me. It might be that they actually put in more effort and overcome in more areas of their life than I do. Yes, Nina.
Yes. Thank you much. Wow, what attunement. I could feel that you were, yes, that's my
You came
question.
to the right class.
But when I think of myself, yes, thank you. When I think of myself, I think of that I'm just trying to consistently believe in God. I'm not even up to keeping mitzvahs yet. Like I'm just trying to consistently, because I came from a family where God doesn't exist. It was like beat into my brain. So I'm just trying to consistently, because sometimes I believe he's there and sometimes I don't. Just consistently believe.
All right. So
That's
this
enough
chapter,
for me.
all right, this chapter is less about not judging ourselves and it's more about not judging others. So let's take your example. For you to believe in God requires a lot of effort. And so you could tell yourself, look, it requires a lot of effort. And so that other person that I see that failed in whatever situation that they were in, I just by knowing my struggle, I can say, and I'm not overcoming, I could say they at least struggled as much as I am, if not more. And so who am I to judge them by failing their struggle? Right? If I haven't been able to overcome my struggle, which I know I have a very difficult struggle, right? You have to know a struggle to recognize a struggle. By recognizing my struggle and knowing that I haven't fully overcome my struggle, who am I to judge the other person? Does that help?
Yes. 100.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So yes, it's a very interesting thing because again, in today's schools and whatever, they talk about rewards for effort. It's a very hard thing for human beings to judge, and that's really what Tanya's point here is that truly I can never know. There's a zero way for me to know the struggle that the other person is putting in. It's also possible that they're not struggling. It's also possible that they're not putting an effort in any of their struggles, even in their easy struggles. But there's no way that I can know that. So since there's no way that I can know that, I have to give everyone the benefit of the doubt, which is another saying of our sages, and to say, listen, I don't know their struggles, and they may have a very strong struggle, and in the amount that they're struggling, I don't even put in that much effort in my uh, in my life. So who am I to judge them? Right? It's easy to say, well, look, I'm a good person, but I don't struggle to be a good person, right? Or even if I did struggle, I don't struggle today. That's another point that Tanya makes in other places. The question is not what you did once upon a time, it's what you do today, because you're judged every single day. If you're still in this world, you're here for a mission today. Just to tell a story, and a fascinating story. There was a story talking about, we're judged by today. There was a story in the Talmud. There was once a great rabbi he was walking with his mother on Shabbat, and his mother's shoe broke, and you couldn't fix the shoe on Shabbat. It was broken in a way that you weren't allowed to fix it on Shabbat. And so this great rabbi held his hand under his mother's foot. Every time she would put her foot down, he crawled on the floor so she wouldn't have to touch the floor. So he honored his mother to such a great extent. And one day this great sage was sick, and his mother came to the sages and told the sages, you should pray for my son, because look at how great he was at honoring his mother. And you know what the sages told her? They said, even if he would double what he did then, he still wouldn't reach honoring his mother. So all the commentators want to know, what do you mean? This guy honored his mother to a high extent. And the answer was, what they meant is that if he finished his mission in life, he's ready to die. Okay? What they meant was, he's alive, he still has more to honor his mother. Whatever he did then doesn't count. He's still got to do another thing. Just because once upon a time he held out his hands for his mother's foot, it's still not enough. He's living, and we want him to live more. We're going to pronounce that he has more to do. And so the same thing. Sometimes we might judge other people because I say, look, I struggled once upon a time and I overcame. A lot of people do that. Or I had this startup and it was so hard and I pushed through. So you little young kids, you can put in the effort. But we don't get judged by what we did a long time ago, at least from God's perspective. We're judged every single day. We have to look at what we're doing today. And so it's easy to judge people based on what I did a long time ago. But look at what you're doing now. Let's take a look here at the another example of Tanya. See, or the Tanya brings home what we said earlier. And he gives more examples. And any person who has not adopted this approach of fighting this difficult war against the body could not be described as fighting his impulse to evil, which blazes like a flaming fire. He has not caused his impulse to evil to be subdued and broken through trepidation of God. A person might observe all the mitzvahs meticulously and pray in synagogue 3 times a day and yet he has not even begun to fight his impulse to evil. The test of this is he struggling greatly? So now he's going to give another example. Similarly with concentration during our other acts of devotional worship, such as the biblical requirement of grace after meals, as well as the rabbinically required blessings, both over pleasurable experiences and before mitzvos. And it goes without saying, having authentic intentions when performing the mitzvos, there must be an ongoing struggle with the impulse to evil for more intense devotion and less distraction. So all those examples, as you can tell, are written to the religious Jew, telling them, yeah, you may be doing everything right, but let's look at the quality of what you're doing. Where is that struggle? And so that's what we have to turn to ourselves and say, where is our struggle? So in this case, somebody who always reads the grace after meals, but are they reading it with the intention? Or other mitzvahs, are they doing with intention? Then he continues. Similarly, with the commitment to Torah study, you should study much more than you want or desire, by nature or by nurture, through an intense struggle with your body. It says that we should study Torah all day, or whatever, every minute that we have available. Because to study a little bit more than your natural inclination requires just a minor battle, which can't be compared in any way to really fighting your impulse to evil, which blazes like a fire. For if you don't champion over your impulse to evil, subduing it and breaking it before God, you are classified as a complete Rasha. I'm not going to get into that, but his point here was that you are studying 10 hours a day, but really you could study 10 and a half hours a day. So you, by not studying 10 and a half hours a day, you might be worse than that person that you see that you call the sinner. Because that extra half hour would take a lot less effort for you than it would for that person. Now he's going to give examples in the negative. Till now we've spoken about positive, things that you can do better. Now he's going to talk about areas that we might fail. So he says, and is there really a difference? Oh, sorry. No, sorry. He's not going to do that. He's just going to say that just because your struggle is in doing something positive and his struggle is in doing something negative, it doesn't make a difference. It's all about serving God. And that's what he says. Is there really any difference between turning away from evil and doing good? They are all the mitzvahs of God, of the Holy King, and the single and unique blessed be He. So his point is that though you might think of yourself as better because your failings are in the positive and his failings are in the negative, he says that's not true. It's all about serving God. And if it's about serving God, all that matters is that you're serving God and how much effort you put into that. And he continues, trying to study 10 hours a year. For those who are here, you study more than 10 hours a year. And we're doing an hour a week here. All right, so too with other commandments, there needs to be an actual struggle with the impulse to evil, especially in financial matters involving tzedakah, such as worship through charity, etc. As I gave the examples earlier, that though I may give charity more than the other person, at least percentage-wise, I might struggle in how I give it. I might struggle in who I give it to. There are always ways to update our there are always ways to update our charity, right? There are some people that only give charity to people that they feel good giving to. So you might break yourself by giving charity you don't feel good giving to. There are all different ways. Then he continues. Even in areas of turn away from evil, avoiding transgression, which superficially the religious person seems to succeed, he's going to tell you, even there you're not succeeding so much. As he says, any intelligent person can find areas in his life where he does not turn away from evil completely in everything, through everything, and with everything, in every instance where an intense struggle is called for in a measure described above. So he's going to give some examples where we might not think about it, but we also fail. Or even a struggle less than what is described above, such as stopping in the middle of an enjoyable but pointless discussion. All right, so these are things we can relate to. We're wasting our time. We're just talking, pointless discussions. Or even worse, to cease telling a negative story about someone, even if the negative content is slight and minuscule, and even though the negative content is true, and even when the purpose is not to speak negatively about the other person, but merely to demonstrate our own innocence. So this is an important thing, by the way. Sometimes we say things, and I think we all recognize it in ourselves, so that people should think of us in a certain way. And even that can be considered gossip. Even if we're telling the truth and we say someone else did it and it wasn't me and I wasn't involved in it and I wasn't doing it, but then you're implicating someone else. Better be thrown under the bus sometimes than to implicate someone else. Now, if you might get fired from your job, that's another question. But we have to think about this idea. And here he brings a story from the Talmud. I'll just read it quickly. As we know from the story, Rabbi Shimon said to his father, a holy rabbi, I did not write this. Rabbi Yehuda the tailor wrote it, and his father replied, keep away from Lashon Hara. Look there in Talmud Bava Basra, beginning of chapter 10. So there was a story where Rabbi Shimon, there was a document that was written wrong, and Rabbi Shimon said, I didn't write it, he wrote it. And his father said, why are you telling me who wrote it? It's not, there's gossip. Just because you're exonerating yourself, that's no excuse to throw someone else on the bus. There's so many common examples of things like this, which you probably do all the time. All right, so he's telling us that even if you think you're very religious, not only are there areas of positive that you could struggle more and put in more effort that you're not, but even in negative actions, they may be more slight negative actions. They're not overt, but even there are many areas where we all fail. For example, gossip. I think that's an easy one. I think you all would agree that many of us fail in areas of gossip. And even if we don't think we fail in gossip, the deeper you think about gossip, the more you realize that you probably fail as well. Or as you said, even if it's not gossip, even just wasting your time. Then he continues, especially you should feel humbled about your shortcomings in the area of sanctifying yourself to that which is permissible, which that was a previous chapter, which is in fact a biblical requirement based on the verse, you shall be holy, you shall sanctify yourself before God. And you can also find other areas of rabbinic law in which you have been lax. The words of the scribes are even more stringent than the words of the Torah. So this is another important one. I might pause here as well. Here he talks about the idea that we may be lax in observance of rabbinic law. A lot of people find themselves diminishing the rabbi's opinions. No, okay, but no, seriously, a lot of times we might think, well, it's only a rabbinic prohibition, it's only a rabbinic problem, it's not a big deal. But as our sages say in the Talmud, that the words of the scribes are even more stringent than the words of the Torah, meaning we have to be more careful about them than the words of the Torah. So we might be failing in areas where we deem not that important, but really they are very important. Because we say, oh, it's the rabbi who said that. Oh, the rabbi said we can't do this. So the rabbi said, big deal. Yet all these things and others are the sins which a person tramples under his feet and fails to take seriously, and these sins are now regarded as permissible since they have been violated repeatedly, etc. For those who came to the course in the Talmud, we demonstrated how even rabbinic law is all part of God's will and desire. And if rabbinic law is part of God's will and desire, who are we to say and just push away rabbinic law? Who are we to just say that what the rabbi said is unimportant? And so when we just dismiss it or not that careful about it because we say it's rabbinic law, we are once again, as it pertains to our relationship with God, we're diminishing our relationship with God. And so who am I to judge someone else when I myself know that I fail in my struggles with rabbinic law? And his next point here was there are certain things that we do over and over again. And the more often you do it, the more likely you are to fail. If you do the wrong thing a couple times, you're more likely to fail. You know, how many people do I hear from that used to be religious and then stopped being religious? They talk about, the first time they did something, they thought lightning would strike them or something would go wrong or their life would turn upside down. But then after a while of doing it, they get used to it. That is one of the sneakiest causes of our doing things wrong, is when we do something too many times. When we do something too many times, it becomes, I do it all the time. I'm just not a nice person. I'm just, that's the way I do it. I talk about people. I'm not so careful in this, So all these areas of life where we have done it multiple times, we have to be very careful because that is an area where we are failing and we need to watch out for that. I want to finish this chapter because we're almost done, because I want to move on to the next chapter. So let me just finish this next page. We'll do it quickly. And here he ends off and says basically that if you are at all involved in the religion, the minor transgression shouldn't be so minor. And this is what he says. But in truth, if you are learned in Jewish text and you hold fast to God's Torah and you desire to be close to God, then even these minor sins should make you feel that your sin is too great to bear and your culpability is far greater, doubled and redoubled, in that you fail to battle and overcome your impulse to evil at the level of intense struggle mentioned above. In this sense, your culpability is more than the most religiously reverent person who sits at the street corners and is far from God and his Torah, because with those distant from God, their culpability is not so great. In their failure to overcome the impulse to evil which blazes like a flaming fire, as a result of the trepidation of God, who watches over and discerns all their deeds, their culpability does not approach that of someone who comes near to God, to his Torah and his service, because from the religious person who more is expected. As our rabbis of blessed memory told about Acher, one of the greatest Talmudic sages who later deviated from traditional Judaism, that his culpability was greater because he had known my glory. That is why our sages of blessed memory taught, in reference to those uneducated in Judaism, that since they are unaware of the severity of their actions, their deliberate sins are considered as inadvertent actions. So here you can already see, once again, I say Chabad is both a philosophy and a movement. You can already see how Chabad never denigrated the non-religious Jew. It's so clear in this chapter that Tanya clearly says, who am I to judge a non-religious Jew? Look at what they grew up in. Look what I grew up in. Look at what I know. Look what they know about connection to God and closeness to God. The Chabad rabbi looks at the irreverent Jew as greater than themselves if they're truly listening to their teachings. And that's why I always say Chabad, it's so important. Chabad is built a philosophy and a movement. And in order to really tap into that movement, you need to get to the philosophy. And that's what we're studying today. This is how a Chabadnik goes about his life, is that he never judges anybody else. And so to a Chabadnik, a Jew putting on tefillin once a year, or a Jew lighting Shabbat candles, with a great struggle, they might be greater than what I've done the entire year. So who am I ever to judge someone else? But again, I want to take this concept, though, applies to all of us, whether you're religious or not religious. As I said, sometimes when we're not religious, we can easily judge the religious Jews. But once again, Tanya teaches us, understand their circumstances, their lives, their struggle. Their struggle may be totally different than yours. And so where you struggle, they don't struggle. Where they struggle, you don't struggle. And where you struggle, you fail. And we all know our failures and our struggles. And so this is the philosophical idea. And so the next time you're talking to someone, the reason we will act with humility with them is because we understand, despite whatever character traits they may have, despite whatever issues they may present, despite seemingly them being far inferior to us, in God's eyes, which automatically means in my eyes, I should never view anybody else as inferior to me. And I will treat everybody with dignity and respect, graciousness. And the other honest thing is you can always learn from people, As someone else said about listening to people, listening to other people. When you appreciate this idea, you can learn from people. I learn from other people's struggles, even if their struggles are totally different than mine. But the concept of their struggle applies the same. And hearing how they overcame different struggles of their life should inspire me, because I understand that they struggle and they overcome something that was really difficult for them, and I can totally learn from their lives. So I'm gonna have to stop here, at least the recording. I could stick on for 5 more minutes, but this was a foundational teaching at Chabad, and I hope you take from here the lesson forward to truly, literally, truly, not in theory, but truly be humble in front of every person, knowing that they possibly struggle much more than you and accomplish much more.